Hello, welcome to the barn. My name is Joanne Knight. Today we're going to talk about how I baste in a quilt, and I've had several people ask me about that. It's time for me to work on my Dream Big panel and get that done, and I thought it was a good opportunity to show you how I do that. Everybody does this different, so you want to be able to use the method that works for you, but I'm going to show you how I go about basting in a quilt. It's a little bit of extra steps, but I think it gives me a better finished product whenever I get done. So I'm going to walk you through that. The first thing that I do anytime I start a new project, and every quilt is a project, is I do the first group and name it Final, because that's where I'm going to do my quilting mock-up should I use different quilt groups. And I have a tendency to use a lot of different quilt groups. On this particular one, I brought in a picture of the Dream Big panel that I'm going to be working on because I wanted to be able to see what it looks like as I work my way down the quilt. The next quilt group that I have, I just name it SID, even though it's not Stitch in the Ditch. That's what I name it, and this is where I'm going to do all of my basting because I don't want it to interfere with whatever I'm quilting. I like to use geometric line. If I hit the letter P on my keyboard, that's the shortcut. And you can see that I have it at 5 stitches per inch and a speed of 2. I'm going to hit save and close. You will also notice that there is a little star right up here in the left-hand corner, and that's because it is one of my favorites along with geometric square and geometric circle. These 3 patterns come with your machine whenever you get them, but I don't want to look through all my pages of patterns to find those 3, so I have them keyed as my favorite so that I can get to them easily. Geometric line is a pattern and it's used with draw pattern. If I left click on draw pattern and I start clicking, and then I close that drawing and exit that drawing, each one of these different clicks is a different pattern. So what that does for me on my Stitch in the Ditch is slows down just a tiny bit and hesitates just a tiny bit as it goes from pattern to pattern, and that allows me to reposition my hands. Draw line is a technique, and even though I click several times with draw line, when I select it, it is one pattern. Its speed is determined by controller definitions, not by the project properties. Geometric line is used with draw pattern. Draw line is a technique. So that's the difference in the two. I'm going to select both of them, hit this little X in the upper right hand corner, and it's going to delete them. I'm going to select geometric line, and the first thing that I'm going to do is left click on draw pattern, and right down here at the bottom you see channel lock and it's at 90. You see on my keypad I can select flip channel on my keypad or left click it with my mouse and left click channel lock, and that will lock that geometric line pattern at 0. I am using a double bat on this particular quilt, so what I'm going to do is click from right to left, and I have my spoon foot on so that it's easier for that to travel, and I'm going to quilt a line across the batting on this quilt so that I have a nice straight line, and I'm going to do that with my machine head. I'm engaging channel lock by hitting the center button of my keypad. It turns blue so you know that it is locked, and I am going to click starting at the right side going across. I can make as many clicks as I want to, and I will probably make several because I am using a double bat. Remember I said it's going to do that little bit of hesitation. When I get to the other side, I'm going to hit the center bottom button to close the drawing and hit it again to exit the drawing. Now you can't see my line on the computer screen because I don't have auto view all on. So let's go find it, and there it is right there. Instead of scrolling out and scrolling in on my menu strip, I have a little magnifying glass that says all, and that's my view all. And if I left click on that, you see there's my line right there. So I'm going to start sewing this out. It's a real good way to use up the last of that bobbin thread because you really want to be able to see this line. I do have it set at 5 stitches per inch. I do have it at a slow speed, but I can speed it up if I want to be able to go a little bit faster. You will notice that I also had my hopping foot really close to the top of the fabric because I don't want to get to the bottom and find that I have messed up and don't have enough fabric left or enough backing left to be able to put this quilt in. So I always have a tendency to go really close to the top. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to place this quilt top on that line that I just got through sewing. Hit continue. Creative Studio marks that line as sewn. I'm going to go back to my draw pattern for my geometric line, and this time instead of starting at one side and going all the way to the other, I'm going to start in the center, and I'm going to change my hopping foot to be my open toe foot because I want it to be 1/4 or 1 hopping foot from the edge of the quilt, because that's going to be my line to be able to put my binding on, and that's going to make sure that I start out with a nice clean quilt that's nice and straight. I'm going to still use my channel lock. Close my drawing, exit my drawing, tell Creative Studio to quilt it, and I'm going to start quilting in the center and quilt to the right side. If I start at one side and go all the way across the way I did on the batting, it would push the quilt out of center. So I'm going to start in the middle and quilt to one side and then go back and click it and quilt to the other side. That hopping foot is riding right along the edge of that green panel, which is exactly where I want it to be. As it gets to the corner, I put a little bit of pressure on the left side of the hopping foot, and then that way it doesn't have a tendency to dog ear that corner as bad. Click continue. Pull up my bobbin thread. Now I'm going to go back to the center. I'm going to start from that starting point of the line that I just clicked. Go back to draw pattern. Channel lock is back on. Click from the center to the left side, making sure that that quilt top stays on that basting line on that batting. Sew this side. Click continue, and that side's done. Now all I have left to do is the sides. And I do all of my quilt tops as floating, which just means that I don't pin in my quilt top. It just seems like it's easier for me. It makes it easier to see if that quilt is going straight off the floor. And at the same time, it gives me a little bit of self-gratification because I can see when I am almost done with it. So this is how I would do the sides. If I had an inside border seam, I would put channel lock on and run it down that inside border seam. I don't have an inside border seam on this one, and I got lucky on this one because I still have that side to be able to run down the side of this panel and make sure that that hopping foot stays straight on the side of that panel, because again, that's where my binding's going to be. What I'm going to do is go back to draw pattern, select it, and I've got my geometric line still selected. I'm going to select my top right button, which is flip channel, engage my channel lock, and I am going to run this machine from the bottom to the top. I'm not going to quilt it that way because you have a tendency to get skipped stitches when you do that. But if I were to go from the top down to the bottom, I would spend that entire quilt trying to make that quilt side match the corners, and corners are always dog-eared. So if I come down a little bit, turn my channel lock on, and go back to the top and start my clicking there, then I know that I have a 90-degree corner as I go down the side of that quilt. I can tug that quilt just a little bit to make it go where I need it to go. And I'm going to click that geometric line for as far as I can reach in my sewable area. Exit my drawing, go back, and sew that. Now here's a little trick for you. If you have a frown whenever you get to the bottom of your quilt, what I do is put my finger right behind the hopping foot and give it just a little bit of a tug whenever that machine starts to do that next pattern. Because if I give that just the top only, just a little bit of a tug, then that tends to keep that quilt from sagging as it gets to the bottom, especially when I'm using double batting. Because remember, the hopping foot is dragging on that quilt and it's kind of pushing that fabric down to the bottom. So there's hardly any way you can keep from having a frown when you get down there. But I find that if I put just that little bit of resistance behind that needle, I don't have a frown when I get to the bottom of that quilt. I've got the left side done. Now I'm going to follow the same steps and do the right side. Turn my channel lock on, run just slightly up that quilt, start marking from that corner. You're going to get a doing if you click in the same place twice. That's why it did that. Close, exit, quilt. Let me show you what happens when I roll the quilt. I'm going to have to work really close on this particular panel because it's going to be custom. So when I roll the quilt, what I will do is start back from that last channel lock stitch. And this quilt group is going to get pretty messy as I go along, but that's okay. The other reason why I like to float my quilt tops is because I can make sure that that batting is nice and straight as I go down that quilt and I don't have any bunches in it. So I'm going to start from that last channel lock. I'm going to go back to draw pattern, select it. I'm going to engage my channel lock, which remembers that I was on 90 and that's what I want it to do. I'm going to click, going down the side of the quilt, and then I am going to go to quilt. I do all of this with the clamps off. That way everything is nice and relaxed. Put my fingers right behind that hopping foot, making sure that it's running nice and straight and I'm not leaning on it any more than I have to. Pull up my bobbin thread, hit continue, go over to the left side, and it doesn't make any difference whether you start on the left side or the right side. I just usually start wherever my machine head is, but I don't click out the other side until I finish quilting the side that I am working on. Exit, quilt it. That's the way that I baste in my quilt, and I've been doing it this way for a really long time. As I said, it takes a couple of extra steps, but I want to make sure that I am doing a nice, straight, even quilt whenever I put this in. So the next thing that I can do is draw my boundaries and use Nancy Hackey's patterns and get this piece quilted out. I hope that helps you. I thank you for coming and playing with me at the barn. Until next time.